With this idea of good deeds and purgatory as a place of torture, that you had to be tortured until you'd worked off your bad deeds, this fear that even if you did confess, you went to confession, that you would forget something, or there was something you didn't know that you did that was wrong, for many people created a great sense of fear. These people, please remember, they're uneducated, they're illiterate, they only know what they're told by their local church officials, many of whom in the mid-1500s are not well educated themselves. So the priests, who frequently cannot read and write, are telling the people in their pews what they need to do and what the punishment is. There's a huge amount of misinformation and miscommunication going around, and there is so much fear. How much did I need to do to make up for the bad things I've done? Did I forget any bad things I've done? Have I omitted anything? What else can I do to keep myself from going to hell, to purgatory? What do I need to do in order to keep my soul safe when I die? That fear ends up giving the church a massive amount of power. The church is the center of life, and for many people in today's world, they do not think strongly, constantly, in realistic terms about the afterlife, reward, punishment, and so on. That's something that is out there somewhere. It is not something immediate that is a part of day-to-day life and thought. During the Middle Ages and during the Renaissance, it is. The church is the center of their world. It outranks the king. It is powerful. It is prominent. It is a part of everyday life, both for the common farmer who might not even understand the finer points of doctrine, and for the educated. Now, amongst the educated, the church is the center of education. All colleges and universities in Europe in the mid-1500s are run by the Christian church. And at the pinnacle of that education, the heart of the educational system during the Renaissance, the best ideas or ideological basis for education is something called Scholasticism. Now, understanding Scholasticism is important to understanding what happens in the Reformation. Scholasticism starts out in the medieval university system. And Scholasticism goes back to rediscovering all those dead Greek dudes. You know that whole thing that happened during the Renaissance? Yeah, that. It starts with discovering those ancient dead Greek dudes who were all philosophers, who taught that man was a brilliant and rational creature, and that man, through logic and reason, could understand all things and better himself. These medieval universities take that Greek idea of things being knowable through logic and through reason, and they apply it to religion. Scholasticism teaches that God is knowable through reason. In fact, the best way to know God is to use your mind. Use reason, go back, read books by people who have written about God before you. Rely on their authority and use your own reason to expand upon and improve their argument. Scholasticism, this idea of logic applying to God, leads to one heck of a complex way of looking at religious belief. In fact, Scholasticism kind of makes your head hurt unless you really like logic, because Scholasticism tries to understand everything in Christianity through logic. Everything is based on logic and reason. There has to be a reason for this. Let's see what logically could be the answer. It is complicated, and frequently scholastic arguments may or may not make sense. They may go in a big circle, but as long as they are logically correct, the practical part of it doesn't make as much difference. It's also important to understand how heavily scholasticism relies upon authority. If an old dead guy who is important in the church believes it, then it must be correct. And you're going to see a heavy reliance, at some points almost a blind faith reliance, on past authors in scholasticism. Now, scholasticism is largely possible because of something that Johannes Gutenberg invents. Gutenberg invents something unique that caters into secular authority. Gutenberg invents the printing press. Now, the printing press allows massive communication, which gives the kings, the emperors, and the princes a new boost in power and authority. Up to this point, the church has always outranked the king. Spiritual authority always outranks secular authority. But for the first time here, secular authority, kings and princes, begin to have more power, partially thanks to communication and the ability to put out their laws and their decrees more easily in printed form. Individuals begin to have more power and more pride in their own country. The idea of nationalism. This is our country. We are proud of our country. We're not going to help out your country. It's an us versus them dynamic that is not as strong before this point. Before this point, there was a much more international idea, the idea of the entire world being under God's authority, so all nations being linked. During the Middle Ages, there were few rulers who complained about sending a large percentage of their national profit to Italy. They considered that natural because the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, was God's authority on earth, so of course you sent your money to Rome because, well, that's under God. With the rise of patriotism and nationalism, more and more kings want to keep their money at home. And there's an idea of our country. There are political games being played here at a much grander scale than there were before. That secular authority is on the rise, and people are more aware of what is going on in their country. A lot of that awareness, both inside and outside the church, are thanks to Johannes Gutenberg and his movable type. Now, Gutenberg comes up with a concept for the printing press. You know that. Printing presses had actually been around for quite a while before Gutenberg, most notably in China. The thing is, printing presses before Gutenberg required you to create a stamper of an entire page. In other words, you had to carve an entire book page in reverse on the page in a wooden stamp. When you carved that entire page on the wooden stamp, then you could actually ink it, put it into the printing press, and print it. The problem is if you made any mistake in your printing, well, then you had to start from scratch, which just kind of sort of sucked. What Gutenberg comes up with, what Gutenberg's great invention is, Gutenberg invents a way to have individual letters. Every letter is placed on a different little piece of metal, and those letters can be arranged and rearranged over and over and over again. By rearranging those letters, Gutenberg speeded up the process of printing on a printing press and made a printing press a practical item for promoting ideas, sharing information, and the printing press comes into common use and it changes the world. The printing press has actually been voted the single most important invention in world history, and part of the reason for that is the fact that the printing press allows information to be distributed in ways it could never be distributed before. Of course, the first book that is actually printed on a printing press is the Bible, because I was just blathering on about the idea that the church is the center of life and everything goes back to church authority. The Pope is actually higher than the king. So of course the first book that's printed on a printing press is the Bible. The Gutenberg Bibles are unique because no two are exactly the same. The Gutenberg Bibles were printed strictly in black and white, so any colored notation like that capital letter P on the left-hand side of the picture, those were all added in by hand later on. Now, the ability to print a Bible is a matter of a lot of controversy, not only for church reasons, but also for political reasons. Here we go again. Church is the center of the life. Everything that these people do goes back to church at its center. The reason the king has the authority to be the king is because God says so. Divine blessing on secular power. You introduce the printing press and you start printing copies of the Bible. One of the big issues here is people who are literate, they can read, but they're not well educated. They can read, but they can't think. Getting a hold of copies of the Bible and reinterpreting it, particularly in terms of politics. If somebody starts using the Bible to justify the fact that the king is an idiot and the Bible says we shouldn't pay attention to him, there can be major turmoil and political upheaval as well as religious problems. So this printing of the Bible on Gutenberg's press is going to become an issue. What it does do, though, is it allows people inside the church, bishops, monks, important educated people in the church, to have copies of the Bible. Whereas before, copies of the Bible were handwritten, so they were so rare that most important church people went through their lives without ever seeing one.